I traveled 8 hours to attend my son's wedding and meet his bride for the first time. When I arrived and introduced myself, she slapped me across the face and said, "Staff should be invisible. Don't speak. Just serve the champagne." I was stunned. But when she found out I was her mother-in-law, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Kristen, and I'm 63 years old. After 8 hours of driving through 3 different states, my back ached and my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, but my heart was full of anticipation. Today was my son Michael's wedding day, and I was finally going to meet Skylar, the woman who had captured his heart. The drive from my small town in Ohio to this upscale venue in Virginia had cost me nearly $400 in gas and hotel expenses, money I didn't exactly have to spare on my fixed income. But this was my only child's wedding. I had sold some of my late husband's tools and worked extra shifts at the local diner to make this trip possible. Nothing was going to keep me from being here. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Rosewood Manor, and my breath caught in my throat. The venue was magnificent, all white columns and manicured gardens, with fountains that probably cost more than my annual Social Security check. Luxury cars lined the parking area, BMWs, Mercedes, even a few vehicles I couldn't identify but knew were expensive. My 12-year-old Honda Civic looked painfully out of place among them. Michael had done well for himself. After college, he'd moved to Richmond and landed a job at some financial firm. We talked maybe once a month, brief conversations where he seemed distracted and always in a hurry. I told myself he was just busy building his career, but deep down I felt the growing distance between us. His father's death 3 years ago had hit us both hard, but instead of bringing us closer, it seemed to push Michael further away. I checked my reflection in the car's side mirror one more time. The navy blue dress was the nicest thing I owned, bought specifically for this occasion from the clearance rack at JCPenney. My gray hair was styled as best I could manage at the local salon, and I'd even splurged on new shoes, though they were already pinching my feet. I wanted to look presentable for my son's big day, to make him proud. Walking toward the entrance, I felt increasingly self-conscious. Other guests were arriving in designer outfits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The women wore elegant dresses and carried purses that gleamed with hardware I suspected was real gold. The men looked distinguished in tailored suits. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I approached the main entrance where several people in what appeared to be catering uniforms were directing guests. The foyer was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and flower arrangements that reached nearly to the ceiling. Classical music played softly in the background, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and roses. That's when I saw her. Even without having met Skylar before, I knew instantly this had to be my future daughter-in-law. She was stunning, blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup that looked professionally done, wearing an elegant pale blue dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. She was speaking to someone near the guest book table, her laugh musical and confident. I took a deep breath and walked over, my heart pounding with nervous excitement. This was the moment I'd been looking forward to for months, finally meeting the woman my son loved enough to marry. "Excuse me," I said with a warm smile. "Are you Skylar? I'm Kristen, Michael's mother. I'm so excited to finally meet you." She turned toward me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Then her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Her eyes quickly scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my dress, my shoes, my modest jewelry. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some confusion," she said, her voice crisp and cool. "The catering staff should use the service entrance around back. And please, when you're serving, try to blend into the background. Guests shouldn't have to interact with the help." The words hit me like ice water. I felt my cheeks flush hot with embarrassment and confusion. "Oh no, I think you misunderstood. I'm not with the catering. I'm Michael's mother, Kristen. I drove down from Ohio for the wedding." Skylar's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together in what looked like annoyance rather than understanding. She glanced around as if checking to see who might be watching our interaction. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't funny. Michael's mother couldn't make it today. Family emergency or something. So whatever this is, you need to stop." My stomach dropped. Family emergency? What was she talking about? I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking slightly. There must be some mistake. Let me call Michael right now and clear this up. But before I could dial, Skylar stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Listen, whoever you are, this is my wedding day, and I won't have it ruined by some confused woman pretending to be family. Security!" She raised her voice, looking around for someone in authority. I felt frozen, humiliated, and completely bewildered. Around us, other guests were beginning to notice the commotion. I could feel their eyes on me, their whispered conversations. Some looked concerned, others appeared to be enjoying the drama. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just let me find Michael. He'll explain everything." Skylar's laugh was sharp and cold. "Michael is busy getting ready for his wedding. He doesn't have time for whatever scam this is." She turned to a man in a black suit who appeared to be venue security. "This woman is claiming to be family, but she's obviously not on the guest list. Can you please escort her out?" The security guard looked uncomfortable but approached me anyway. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I turned to see Michael walking toward us, looking handsome in his black tuxedo but wearing an expression I'd never seen before, not joy at seeing his mother, but something closer to panic or embarrassment. "Michael," I said, relief flooding through me. "Thank goodness. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Skylar thought I was with the catering staff, and I was just trying to introduce myself." Michael's face went pale. He looked between Skylar and me, and I could see something calculating in his eyes, as if he was weighing his options. The silence stretched too long. "I thought you weren't coming," he said finally, his voice flat. "You said it might be too expensive, remember?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "I never said that, honey. I told you I was driving down yesterday and would be here early to help with anything you needed. We talked about this 2 weeks ago." Skylar moved to Michael's side, slipping her arm through his possessively. "Darling, you're stressed. Today is supposed to be perfect, remember? Why don't we just focus on that?" Michael nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. "Right. Mom, maybe you should. Maybe you should just find your seat. The ceremony starts soon." Find my seat. No hug, no introduction of his bride to his mother, no explanation for why Skylar had treated me like hired help. Just find my seat and disappear. As I stood there in that beautiful foyer, surrounded by the elegant guests and crystal chandeliers, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my son. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or wedding day nerves. This was something much deeper, much more troubling. But the worst part wasn't even Skylar's mistake or Michael's cold response. The worst part was the growing certainty that none of this had been an accident at all. The ceremony was set to begin in 30 minutes, and I wandered through the venue trying to locate where I was supposed to sit. An usher, barely out of college, looked at his list with a frown when I gave him my name. Kristen, he muttered, scanning the paper. "Oh, here you are. You're in the back section, row 12, seat 14. Row 12. In a wedding with maybe 8 rows of chairs on each side, they had placed the groom's mother in the very back. I followed the usher down the aisle, past elegant guests chatting quietly among themselves, past the reserved sections marked with small, elegant signs reading "Family of the Bride" and "Family of the Groom." But row 12 wasn't marked as family seating. It was where they put the plus ones, the distant acquaintances, the people who had to be invited but weren't really wanted. I took my seat between an elderly man who appeared to be someone's great-uncle and a woman about my age who introduced herself as Skylar's former college roommate. She was friendly enough, making small talk about the beautiful venue and how lovely Skylar looked. "How do you know the couple?" she asked pleasantly. "I'm Michael's mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her face showed genuine surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I just assumed. Well, usually the parents sit up front." I forced a smile. "Special circumstances today, I guess." From my distant vantage point, I could see the front rows filling up. Skylar's parents were being seated in the front row on the bride's side. Her mother in an elegant cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car payment. Her father distinguished in what was clearly an expensive tailored tuxedo. They were followed by what appeared to be siblings, grandparents, and other close family members. On the groom's side, the front row remained conspicuously empty, except for one couple I didn't recognize. The second row had a few people who looked like they might be Michael's college friends or work colleagues. But no family. Because I was the only family Michael had left, and I was sitting in row 12. The ceremony began, and I tried to focus on the joy of the moment. Michael looked handsome standing at the altar, though even from this distance I could see the tension in his shoulders. When Skylar appeared at the back of the aisle in her stunning white gown, there was an audible gasp from the guests. She was truly beautiful, gliding down the aisle with perfect composure. But as I watched my son's face, I didn't see the look of a man overwhelmed with love and joy. Instead, he looked nervous, almost anxious, glancing frequently at the bride's family in the front row as if seeking approval. During the vows, which they had apparently written themselves, Skylar spoke eloquently about choosing family based on shared values and aspirations, and surrounding ourselves with people who elevate us to our highest potential. The words were lovely, but something about the way she emphasized choosing family while looking directly at her parents made my chest tighten. Michael's vows were shorter, more traditional, focusing on love and commitment. But when he mentioned family, he spoke only in future tense, about the family they would build together, the children they hoped to have. Nothing about the family he already had. Nothing about the woman who had raised him alone after his father died. Nothing about the sacrifices that had gotten him to this moment. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I tried to mingle with the other guests. Most were polite but distant when they learned I was Michael's mother, and I began to understand why. Conversations would die awkward, silences would follow, and people would excuse themselves to refill their drinks or find someone else to talk to. It was during one of these painful exchanges that I overheard a conversation that made everything crystal clear. I was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of water I couldn't afford to replace with wine, when I heard Skylar's voice behind me. She was talking to a small group of women, her voice carrying that musical laugh I'd heard earlier. "Oh, you're so sweet to ask about Michael's family," she was saying. "It's actually quite sad. His mother is. Well, let's just say she's a bit troubled. Drinks too much, always causing drama. We thought it was best if she didn't attend today." My blood ran cold. I turned slightly, careful not to make it obvious I was listening. One of the women made a sympathetic noise. "How difficult for Michael. It must be hard to have a mother like that." "It really is," Skylar continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He's worked so hard to build a better life for himself, to rise above his background. My family has really taken him in as one of our own. We're the family he deserves now." Another woman chimed in. "Well, he certainly seems to fit right in with your crowd. You'd never know he came from, well, different circumstances." "Exactly," Skylar said. "That's what I love about him. He has such potential when he's surrounded by the right influences. My father is already talking about bringing him into the family business. With the right guidance, he could really make something of himself." I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had she told people I was too troubled to attend my own son's wedding, but she was painting my son as some kind of charity case who needed saving from his lowly background. The son I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, who had grown up in a loving home despite our financial struggles, who had been raised with values of hard work and integrity. The conversation continued, but I couldn't bear to hear any more. I walked away on unsteady legs, finding a quiet corner where I could try to process what I'd just learned. Everything started to make sense now. Michael's growing distance over the past year, his vague answers about wedding plans, his failure to include me in any of the preparations. Skylar hadn't made a mistake when she treated me like catering staff. She had deliberately created a narrative where I didn't exist as his mother, where I was an embarrassment to be hidden away, and Michael had let her. As I stood there in my clearance rack dress, surrounded by people who had been told I was too troubled to attend my own son's wedding, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered. It was something deeper. My sense of who I was, my place in my son's life, my belief that love and family meant something unshakable. The reception was starting, and guests were being directed into the main ballroom. I followed along numbly, wondering if I should just leave. But where would I go? I had spent almost all my money getting here, and my hotel room was paid for through tomorrow. As we entered the ballroom, I saw the seating chart displayed on an elegant easel. I found my name again. Table 9, in the far corner of the room, with people I'd never met. Michael and Skylar's table was at the front, surrounded by family and close friends who clearly adored them. I made my way to table 9 and introduced myself to my table mates. They were pleasant enough, a mix of Skylar's distant relatives and Michael's work acquaintances. But as the evening progressed, it became clear that none of them knew who I really was to Michael. To them, I was just another guest, someone's +1 perhaps, certainly no one important. The real moment of truth came during the toasts. Skylar's father spoke eloquently about welcoming Michael into their family, about how proud they were to have such a fine young man as a son-in-law. He mentioned taking Michael under his wing, helping him navigate the business world, treating him like the son he'd never had. Then Michael stood to give his own toast. He thanked Skylar's parents for their love and support, for accepting him into their family, for showing him what a real family could be. He spoke about Skylar saving him from a life of mediocrity, about how she had inspired him to become the man he was meant to be. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he acknowledge the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, who had worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, who had loved him unconditionally through every stage of his life. As I sat at table 9, forgotten and invisible, I realized that I hadn't just lost my place at my son's wedding. I had lost my son entirely. But what hurt most of all was the growing certainty that this hadn't happened overnight. This had been planned, orchestrated, carefully executed over months or maybe even years, and my son, the boy I had raised to be honest and kind, had been a willing participant in erasing me from his life. The reception was in full swing when I decided I couldn't just sit at table 9 any longer, watching my son's new life unfold without me. The band was playing something jazzy and sophisticated, couples were dancing, and laughter echoed throughout the elegant ballroom. Everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives while I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's celebration. I noticed that some of the older guests at nearby tables had empty champagne glasses, and the servers seemed overwhelmed with the crowd. Growing up poor had taught me to always help when I could, and old habits die hard. Without thinking, I stood up and began collecting empty glasses from a few tables near mine, thinking I could save the busy staff a trip. It felt good to have something to do, a purpose beyond sitting alone feeling sorry for myself. I had worked in restaurants most of my adult life. This was familiar territory. I gathered a small tray of glasses and was heading toward what I assumed was the direction of the kitchen when I heard an unmistakable voice behind me. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned to find Skylar striding toward me, her beautiful wedding dress flowing behind her like she was floating across the floor. But her face was anything but angelic. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fury in her eyes, and her voice carried an edge that made several nearby guests turn to look. "Oh, I was just helping clear some glasses," I said, confused by her tone. The servers seemed busy, and I noticed these tables needed— "Put those down immediately," she hissed, moving closer. I specifically told the catering manager that staff should remain invisible during the reception. Guests should not see you working. The same cold feeling from our first encounter washed over me. "Skylar, I think you're confused again. I'm not Staff. I'm Michael's mother, remember? We met earlier and Michael cleared everything up. But instead of recognition or embarrassment, Skylar's expression grew even more hostile. She stepped so close I could smell her expensive perfume, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow felt more threatening than if she had shouted. I don't know what your game is, but I'm done playing along. Michael's mother is not here today, and she wouldn't be caught dead cleaning up after her betters like some kind of servant. So whatever sick fantasy this is, it ends now. Skylar, please, I said, my voice shaking. Just call Michael over. He'll tell you who I am. Michael is busy enjoying his wedding reception with people who actually matter to him, she snapped. He doesn't need to deal with some delusional woman who thinks she can crash our wedding and pretend to be family. By now, we had attracted quite an audience. Guests were openly staring, some pulling out their phones. I could see Skylar's parents approaching, along with several of Michael's groomsmen. The music seemed to fade into the background as conversations stopped and all attention focused on our confrontation. Ma'am, perhaps we should discuss this privately, Skylar's father said, his voice diplomatic but firm. He was a tall, distinguished man who commanded respect without raising his voice. There's nothing to discuss, Skylar said, her voice rising despite her father's attempt at discretion. This woman is clearly mentally unstable. She's been going around all day claiming to be Michael's mother, bothering our guests, and now she's pretending to be part of the catering staff. Someone needs to call security before she ruins everything. I felt the walls closing in around me. The beautiful ballroom suddenly felt suffocating, all those eyes staring at me, judging me, believing her version of events. My hands were trembling as I set the glasses down on the nearest table. I'm not pretending anything, I said, my voice barely audible. I drove 8 hours to be here. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn down the road. I have pictures of Michael as a baby on my phone. I can tell you about the scar on his knee from when he fell off his bike when he was 7, or about how he used to have nightmares about monsters under his bed until he was 10. Skylar's laugh was sharp and cruel. Anyone could have gotten that information from social media or old friends. You're obviously some kind of stalker who's done research on Michael's family. That's when I saw him. Michael pushing through the crowd, his face pale and his expression unreadable. Relief flooded through me. Finally, he would put an end to this nightmare. Michael, I called out, probably louder than I should have. Please, tell them who I am. Tell your wife that I'm your mother. Michael stopped about 10 feet away from us, and for a moment that felt like an eternity. He just stared at me. I searched his face for any sign of the boy I had raised, the young man who used to call me every Sunday when he first moved away, the son who had cried in my arms when his father died. But the person looking back at me was a stranger. Skylar's right, he said finally, his voice cold and distant. My mother couldn't make it to the wedding today. Family emergency. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, my hand reaching for something to steady myself. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Michael, I whispered. How can you say that? How can you stand there and pretend you don't know me? Because I don't know you, he said, and there was something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Not just coldness, but active dislike. Whoever you are, whatever you want, you need to leave before this gets any worse. Skylar moved to stand beside her new husband, slipping her arm through his possessively. You see? She said to the crowd around us. Even Michael doesn't recognize this woman. She's obviously some kind of con artist or mentally ill person who fixated on our family. I stood there in my clearance rack dress, surrounded by people in designer clothes, feeling smaller and more alone than I had ever felt in my life. But somewhere in the depths of my humiliation and heartbreak, something else was beginning to stir, a slow-burning anger that started in my chest and spread outward like wildfire. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If that's how you want to play this, then let's play. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery, holding it up so the nearest guests could see. This is Michael on his first day of kindergarten. And this one is from his high school graduation, where I'm standing right next to him in the same dress I wore to his father's funeral 6 months earlier because I couldn't afford a new one. I swiped to another photo. With a speed that surprised everyone, including me, she lunged forward and slapped me across the face so hard that I stumbled sideways, my phone clattering to the marble floor. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the band had stopped playing. "How dare you try to ruin my wedding day with your pathetic lies!" Skylar shrieked, all pretense of elegant composure gone. "Security! Get this crazy woman out of here before I have her arrested for harassment!" I stood there with my hand pressed to my burning cheek, tasting blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. Around us, the crowd was buzzing with shocked whispers and the telltale sound of phone cameras capturing every moment. That's when Skylar's mother appeared at her daughter's side, her face pale with horror. "Skylar Elizabeth Morrison," she said in a voice that could have cut glass. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Mother, this woman," her mother interrupted, "is exactly who she says she is. I've seen those photos before, darling. Michael showed them to us 6 months ago when we first met him. He was very proud of his mother, talked about how hard she worked to put him through college after his father died." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the color drained from Skylar's face, as the realization of what she had done hit her like a freight train. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Michael said his mother was. He told me she was." "What exactly did Michael tell you about his mother?" her father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. But before anyone could answer, Michael stepped forward, his face now flushed red with either embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. "All right, fine," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Yes, she's my mother, but this is exactly why I didn't want her here today. She always has to be the center of attention, always has to cause drama. Look what she's done to our reception." I stared at my son in complete disbelief. Even now, even after his wife had humiliated and assaulted me in front of 100 guests, he was blaming me for the scene. "I caused drama?" I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Your wife slapped me across the face because she refused to believe I was your mother. Maybe if you had dressed appropriately, if you had acted like you belonged here instead of clearing tables like hired help, none of this would have happened," Michael shot back. The cruelty of those words, the casual dismissal of everything I was and everything I had done for him, finally broke something inside me that had been holding on by a thread. "You're right," I said quietly, and the sudden calm in my voice seemed to surprise everyone, including myself. "I don't belong here. I thought I did, but clearly I was mistaken." I bent down and picked up my phone, checking to make sure it wasn't broken. Then I looked around at all the faces staring at me. Some sympathetic, some judgmental, all of them strangers who would forget about this drama long before they forgot about the excellent salmon they'd been served for dinner. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said to Skylar, my voice polite and formal. "I hope you both get exactly what you deserve." Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my head held high despite the burning in my cheek and the shattered pieces of my heart scattered across that marble floor. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of conversation resuming, the awkward laughter of people trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed something deeply uncomfortable. But I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was done trying to earn my place in my son's world. I was finally ready to start building my own. I made it as far as the hotel parking lot before the shock wore off and the tears came. Sitting in my Honda Civic under the fluorescent lights, I pressed a bag of ice from the hotel vending machine against my swollen cheek and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The slap had been bad enough, but Michael's reaction afterward had been devastating. The way he had looked at me like I was an embarrassment, the casual cruelty in his voice when he blamed me for ruining his reception. It was like looking at a complete stranger wearing my son's face. I was fumbling for my room key when my phone rang. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Michael calling to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this nightmare make sense. Instead, it was an unknown local number. "Mrs. Holloway?" This is Patricia Morrison, Skylar's mother. Could we please meet? I'm in the hotel lobby downstairs. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Patricia in the hotel's small business center, a private space away from the few other guests in the lobby. She looked elegant, even at 11 o'clock at night, though I could see the strain around her eyes. In her hands, she held a manila folder that she kept glancing at like it contained something she wished she didn't have to share. First, let me apologize profusely for what happened tonight, she began, her voice genuinely distressed. Skylar's behavior was absolutely inexcusable, and I am mortified that she struck you. We raised her better than that. I touched my cheek gingerly. The swelling had gone down, but it was still tender. I just don't understand any of it. Why did she think I was catering staff? Why did Michael tell her I wasn't coming? None of it makes sense. Patricia's face grew even more troubled. I'm afraid it makes more sense than you might want it to. Mrs. Holloway, may I call you Kristen? I need to show you something, but I want you to know that I'm only doing this because I believe you deserve to know the truth. She opened the manila folder and pulled out what looked like printed emails and text messages. After tonight's incident, I went through some of Skylar's things. I found these communications between her and Michael over the past 8 months. She handed me the first page, and my hands trembled as I read. It was an email from Michael to Skylar, dated 6 months ago. Sky, I've been thinking about what you said about my mom. You're probably right that she wouldn't fit in with your family's crowd. She's different. Working class, you know. She tries hard, but she doesn't really understand how to act around sophisticated people. Maybe it would be better if we just said she couldn't make it to the wedding. I hate to hurt her feelings, but I also don't want to embarrass you or your parents. I felt sick reading it, but Patricia gently encouraged me to continue. The next email was Skylar's response. Michael, darling, I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason about this. Your mother sounds like a lovely woman, but she simply wouldn't be comfortable at our wedding. Think of it as protecting her from an awkward situation. Besides, my father is planning to introduce you to some very important business contacts at the reception. You need to be able to focus on making the right impression, not worrying about whether your mother is using the right fork. The correspondence continued over several months, with my son gradually agreeing to more and more elaborate deceptions. They had planned to tell people I was ill, then that I had a family emergency, then finally that I was too troubled to attend. But it was the text message thread from just 2 weeks ago that truly broke my heart. Skylar, what if she just shows up anyway? What if she doesn't believe you when you tell her not to come? Michael, she won't. She doesn't have the money for the trip, and she's too proud to ask me for help. Besides, I told her the wedding was just going to be a small family thing. Skylar, but what if she does? What if she somehow makes it here? Michael, then we stick to the story. As far as everyone knows, my mother couldn't make it. If some random woman shows up claiming to be her, well, that's just some confused person who needs to be escorted out. Skylar, you'd really do that? You'd actually pretend not to know your own mother? Michael, Sky, you've shown me what real family looks like. Your parents have done more for me in 6 months than my mom did in years. She's always been dramatic, always making everything about her. This is our day, and I'm not going to let her ruin it. I set the papers down with shaking hands, unable to read anymore. Patricia reached across the small table and gently touched my arm. There's more, she said softly. I found out that Skylar had been coaching Michael on how to improve himself for months. She convinced him that his background was something to be ashamed of, that talking about his childhood or his father's death made him seem needy and unprofessional. She pulled out another document. This is a list she made of things Michael needed to change about himself to fit in with the right kind of people. She had him take speech lessons to eliminate what she called his regional accent. She made him throw away clothes she deemed inappropriate. She even had him practice telling stories about fictional family vacations and educational experiences to replace his real memories. I stared at the list, which included items like, stop mentioning mother's multiple jobs, makes family seem unstable, and never discuss father's death, too emotional for business settings, and learn proper etiquette for formal dining. No more casual family restaurant habits. She was systematically erasing me from his life. I whispered. I'm afraid so, Patricia confirmed. And I'm ashamed to say that my husband and I may have unknowingly contributed to this. We were so impressed with Michael's ambition and intelligence that we perhaps made too much of wanting to help him reach his potential. We meant well, but looking at these documents, I can see how our enthusiasm might have been interpreted as conditional acceptance. She pulled out one final email, this one more recent. Michael, darling, you've come so far from where you started. My parents absolutely adore you, and Daddy is already talking about making you a junior partner in the firm after we're married. You're going to be everything you were meant to be, everything your background tried to prevent you from becoming. I'm so proud of how you've risen above your origins. Origins, I repeated bitterly, like I was some kind of obstacle he had to overcome instead of the person who loved him unconditionally his entire life. Patricia looked genuinely pained. Kristen, I want you to know that this isn't how we raised Skylar. I appreciated her words, but they couldn't undo the damage. So Michael has been planning this deception for months. He looked me in the eye 2 weeks ago when I called to confirm my travel plans, and he lied to me. He let me spend money I couldn't afford, drive 8 hours, walk into that wedding thinking I was going to meet my new daughter-in-law, all while knowing exactly what was going to happen. I believe so, yes. The full magnitude of the betrayal hit me then. This hadn't been a misunderstanding or wedding day stress, or even just Skylar's snobbery. This had been a calculated, methodical erasure of my existence from my son's life. He had chosen to sacrifice our relationship for the promise of wealth and social status. There's something else, Patricia said hesitantly. I don't know if you're aware, but Michael has been telling people that his father was an attorney who died in a car accident. He's been claiming that he grew up in a 2-story house in a nice suburb and that his mother was a homemaker who volunteers for charity. I laughed bitterly. His father was a mechanic who died of a heart attack at 52. We lived in a rental duplex, and I worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. There was no volunteering for charity because I was too busy trying to survive. I'm so sorry, Kristen. We sat in silence for a few minutes while I tried to process everything I'd learned. Finally, I looked up at Patricia, who was watching me with genuine concern. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Skylar is your daughter. Michael is your new son-in-law. Why are you betraying their confidence to show me these documents? Patricia's expression hardened slightly. Because what they did tonight was cruel and unforgivable. Because my daughter struck another woman at her own wedding reception, and my new son-in-law stood by and watched it happen. Because I've seen enough manipulation in my lifetime to recognize it, and I won't be party to it. She leaned forward, her voice intense. And because I have a feeling that Skylar's treatment of you tonight is just the beginning. If she could convince Michael to erase his own mother from his life, what else might she convince him to do? What other relationships will she systematically destroy? What other parts of his identity will she decide are unsuitable for her vision of their perfect life? I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. Tonight had been about more than just hiding an embarrassing relative from wedding guests. It had been a demonstration of Skylar's power over Michael, a test of how far she could push him to betray his own values and relationships. What happens now? I asked. I don't know, Patricia admitted. But I do know that you deserve better than this. And frankly, so does Michael, even though he doesn't seem to realize it yet. She stood up and gathered the papers back into the folder. Keep these, she said, handing it to me. I made copies. If you ever need proof of what really happened, if anyone ever tries to gaslight you into believing you imagined tonight or misunderstood the situation, you'll have documentation. As I walked back to my room, clutching the folder that contained the evidence of my son's betrayal, I realized that Patricia was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. Skylar had successfully isolated Michael from his past, his family, his authentic self. She had turned him into a project, a fixer-upper that she could mold into her ideal husband. But what happened when the project was complete? What happened when there was nothing left of the real Michael? Just a carefully constructed facade designed to please his wife and her family. I had lost my son tonight, but in a strange way, Michael had lost something too. He had traded his integrity, his history, and his mother's love for the promise of belonging to a world that would only accept him if he completely erased who he really was. The difference was, I was finally ready to stop trying to earn my place in a family that didn't want me. Michael, on the other hand, would spend the rest of his life trying to prove he deserved to stay in one that only loved the version of himself that Skylar had created. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the hotel window watching the sunrise paint the Virginia sky in shades of pink and gold. Patricia's folder spread across the small desk in front of me. I read through every email, every text message, every calculated step my son had taken to erase me from his life. By morning, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The devastating grief was still there, but it was no longer the dominant emotion. What I felt now was clarity, sharp, cold, and liberating. I had spent 63 years of my life believing that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, that love could overcome any obstacle. I had worked myself to exhaustion raising Michael, had sacrificed my own dreams and desires to give him opportunities I never had. I had believed that those sacrifices were investments in an unbreakable bond. But Michael had shown me the truth. Love was only as strong as the person receiving it allowed it to be. And he had chosen to trade that love for something he valued more: acceptance into a world that required him to pretend I never existed. I checked out of the hotel at 7 in the morning and drove straight home to Ohio, 8 hours of highway giving me plenty of time to think. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The first call I made was to my lawyer, a kind man named Robert who had handled my husband's estate and helped me navigate the financial chaos after his death. I scheduled an appointment for the following Monday and spent the weekend going through every legal document in my house. What I found was illuminating. Over the years, I had made Michael the beneficiary of my life insurance policy, a modest $10,000 policy, but one that would have covered my funeral expenses and left him a small inheritance. I had also named him as my emergency contact on all my medical forms and had given him power of attorney should I ever become incapacitated. Most significantly, I had been planning to leave him the house. It wasn't much. A small 2-bedroom ranch that I'd been paying off for 23 years, but it was mine, and it would have been his someday. I had always imagined him bringing his own children here for holidays, showing them the room where their daddy grew up, maintaining some connection to his roots even as he built his own life. That fantasy died in a hotel business center in Virginia. Monday morning, I sat across from Robert and made the changes I should have made years ago. My life insurance beneficiary was changed to the local women's shelter, where I had volunteered after my husband's death. My emergency contact became my neighbor Eleanor, a widow my age who had become a close friend. And the house would go to my cousin Sarah's daughter, a young single mother who was struggling to make ends meet. Michael's name was removed from every document. "Are you sure about this, Kristen?" Robert asked gently. "These kinds of decisions can be difficult to reverse, and family relationships sometimes heal over time." I thought about Michael's face when he denied knowing me, about the months of planning that had gone into my humiliation, about the careful way he had been trained to be ashamed of everything I was. "I'm sure," I said. The next step was more practical, but equally important. For the past 5 years, since Michael had gotten his job in Richmond, I had been sending him money whenever he mentioned financial stress. It was never huge amounts, $50 here, $100 there. But it added up. When he moved into his apartment, I had helped with the security deposit. When his car needed repairs, I contributed what I could. When he wanted to take Skylar on expensive dates to impress her family, I picked up extra shifts at the diner to send him what he needed. I calculated that over the past 2 years alone, I had sent him nearly $3,000. Money I had earned serving coffee and cleaning tables. Money I had scraped together from my Social Security checks and part-time work. Money that had meant going without things I needed so that my son could maintain his new lifestyle. I called my bank and canceled the automatic transfer I had set up to send him $100 every month. Then I opened a separate savings account for myself, something I had never been able to afford before because every spare dollar had gone to Michael. But the most important change I made wasn't financial or legal. It was emotional. I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. For 25 years of motherhood, I had lived in a state of constant availability. When Michael was young, I was always on call for scraped knees and bad dreams and forgotten homework. As he got older, I remained ready to drop everything if he needed advice, comfort, or just someone to listen. Even after he moved away, I kept my phone nearby, hoping for his calls, treasuring our increasingly brief conversations. Now I turned the ringer off and left it in the kitchen drawer. If he wanted to reach me, he would have to work harder than a casual phone call that he could end the moment he got bored or distracted. The silence was terrifying at first. For the first week after I returned from Virginia, I jumped every time I heard a car door slam, convinced it would be Michael coming to apologize, to explain, to somehow make everything right. But no one came. By the second week, the silence became peaceful. I started reading again, something I hadn't had time for in years. I took long walks around my neighborhood, really seeing the houses and gardens I had been rushing past for decades. I called old friends I had lost touch with because I had been too focused on being available for Michael. The third week brought an unexpected phone call from my cousin Sarah, the one whose daughter would now inherit my house. "Kristen, honey, I just talked to my ex-sister-in-law who lives in Richmond, and she said she saw something online about Michael's wedding. She said there was some kind of incident with his mother. I told her that couldn't be right, because you would have told me if you went to Virginia. I had always been private about family problems, preferring to handle difficulties quietly rather than burden others with my troubles. But something about Sarah's concerned voice broke through my usual reserve, and I found myself telling her the whole story. "That little bastard," Sarah said when I finished, her voice fierce with protective anger. "How dare he treat you like that after everything you've done for him? And that wife of his sounds like a real piece of work." It felt strange to hear someone else's outrage on my behalf. For so long, I had internalized the idea that Michael's growing distance was somehow my fault, that I wasn't sophisticated enough or successful enough to deserve a place in his new life. "You know what you need?" Sarah continued. "You need to come visit me in Florida. When was the last time you took a real vacation?" I couldn't remember. Vacations had been one of the many luxuries I had sacrificed to support Michael's education and lifestyle. Even long weekends felt selfish when there was always something he needed or some bill that required attention. "I can't afford—" I started automatically. "Bullshit," Sarah interrupted. "You're not sending money to Michael anymore, right? So take that $100 you were mailing him every month and put it toward a plane ticket. I've got a spare bedroom and a pool, and it's 80 degrees here while you're probably freezing your ass off in Ohio." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the following days. For the first time in decades, I started thinking about what I wanted instead of what other people needed from me. I wanted to see the ocean again, something I hadn't done since my honeymoon 35 years ago. I wanted to eat dinner at 6 o'clock instead of rushing to the diner for the evening shift. I wanted to wake up in the morning without immediately thinking about who might need something from me. Most of all, I wanted to stop feeling guilty for taking up space in the world. I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the diner. My manager was surprised. I had been one of their most reliable employees for 8 years, but she understood when I explained that I wanted to try something different while I was still healthy enough to enjoy it. "You know, Kristen," she said thoughtfully, "you've always been good with people. Have you ever thought about doing something where you could use those skills differently? Maybe something that doesn't involve being on your feet for 8 hours a day?" The question stayed with me as I finished out my final shifts. What did I want to do with the rest of my life? For so long, my identity had been defined by being Michael's mother, by working multiple jobs to support his dreams, by sacrificing my own ambitions for his success. But Michael didn't want to be my son anymore. So who was I now? The answer came to me gradually as I spent my last week at the diner really observing my coworkers and customers. I watched Maria, a young single mother, struggle to balance her shifts with her son's school schedule. I listened to Frank, an elderly regular, talk about how lonely he was since his wife died. I saw how Sharon, one of the other waitresses, lit up when customers asked about her night school classes. These people had stories, dreams, struggles that went far beyond the coffee and pie I served them. And I had always been good at listening, at offering comfort, at making people feel seen and valued. Maybe it was time to use those skills in a different way. On my last day at the diner, I did something I had never done before. I ate my lunch at the counter instead of rushing through it in the break room. I sat there like a customer, looking around at the place that had been my second home for 8 years, thinking about all the conversations I had heard, all the small kindnesses I had witnessed, all the human connections that happened over shared meals. That's when I realized what I wanted to do next. I wanted to create a place where those connections could happen intentionally, where people who felt invisible or forgotten could come and be seen. Not a business exactly, but something more meaningful. A space where community could grow naturally, where everyone's story mattered. For the first time since that terrible night in Virginia, I felt genuinely excited about the future, not because I was running away from my pain, but because I was finally running toward something that was entirely my own. Michael had chosen his path. Now it was time for me to choose mine. 2 years passed before Michael came back into my life, and when he did, I almost didn't recognize the man standing on my front porch. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. I had just returned from my weekly pottery class, something I had discovered I loved during my 3-month stay with Sarah in Florida. When I found him sitting in his car in my driveway, he looked thinner than I remembered, older somehow, despite only being 31. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and stress. I took my time gathering my pottery supplies from the back seat, giving myself a moment to process this unexpected appearance. 2 years of silence, and now he was here without warning, without permission, acting as if he had the right to simply show up in my life whenever convenient. "Hello, Michael," I said calmly as I approached my front door, keys already in hand. "Mom." His voice cracked slightly on the word, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure. "Can we talk? Please?" I unlocked my door and stepped inside, leaving it open behind me. Not an invitation, exactly, but not a rejection either. He followed me into the living room that he had once known so well, but now surveyed like a stranger trying to get his bearings. The house had changed significantly since his last visit 3 years ago. Gone were the faded family photos that had once crowded every surface, replaced by artwork I had collected during my travels and pieces I had created in my pottery classes. The old, worn furniture had been replaced with comfortable pieces I had actually chosen for myself, rather than inherited or bought secondhand out of necessity. Michael picked up a small ceramic vase from the coffee table, turning it over to examine the signature on the bottom. "You made this?" I did. I settled into my favorite armchair, a beautiful sage green piece I had splurged on during my second trip to visit Sarah, and waited for him to explain why he was here. He set the vase down carefully and perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Skylar and I, we're getting divorced." I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no maternal urge to comfort him. Just a mild curiosity about why he thought this news would matter to me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was surprised to realize I actually meant it. Not because I wanted them to stay together, but because divorce was always painful, always represented the death of dreams and hopes. "It's been over for months, really," he continued, his voice getting stronger as he warmed to his subject. God, Mom, she was controlling everything. Who I could talk to, where we could go, what I could wear. She had opinions about everything, and if I disagreed with her, she would just shut down. Give me the silent treatment until I apologized and did things her way. I listened without comment, recognizing the irony of my son complaining about being controlled by someone whose control he had actively sought and embraced when it meant elevating his social status. "The worst part," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "was how she talked about you. Even after we were married, she would bring up that night at the wedding and laugh about it. She thought it was funny that she had slapped you, that she had humiliated you in front of all those people. She said it proved that you were weak, that you didn't fight back. Now I felt something. A cold, clean anger that settled in my chest like ice. And what did you say when she talked about that night? Michael's face flushed red. I told her she was wrong. I told her you weren't weak. But you didn't defend me at the time. It wasn't a question. No, he whispered. I didn't. We sat in silence for several minutes. Michael kept glancing around the room, his eyes lingering on the changes, the evidence of a life being lived without him. Finally, he cleared his throat and leaned forward. Mom, I came here to apologize. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I was stupid and selfish, and I got caught up in wanting to impress her family, I thought. I thought if I could just be the person they wanted me to be, everything would be perfect. I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine understanding rather than just regret over consequences. And how did that work out for you? His laugh was bitter. It didn't. They never really accepted me. Not really. I was always performing, always trying to prove I belonged. And in the end, when Skylar's father's business started having problems and they couldn't offer me that partnership anymore, suddenly I wasn't so impressive. Skylar started looking at other options, if you know what I mean. She had an affair. Multiple affairs. She said I had gotten boring and that she deserved someone who could keep up with her lifestyle. The divorce lawyer said she had been planning this for at least 6 months, maybe longer. She took half of everything, including money I had invested based on her father's advice. He rubbed his face with both hands. I lost my job too. Turns out when you're hired mainly because of family connections and those connections disappear, your employment becomes expendable. I absorbed this information without the emotional reaction he seemed to be expecting. His pain was real, but it was also the natural consequence of choices he had made with full knowledge of what he was sacrificing. I'm sorry you're going through this difficult time, I said carefully, but I'm not sure why you're telling me about it. Michael's eyes widened with surprise. I hoped. Mom, I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. I know I messed up, but I've learned my lesson. I understand now what really matters. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. For a moment, I could see him as he had been as a child, eager, hopeful, believing that love could fix anything, that apologies could erase any hurt. Part of me, the part that had spent 31 years loving him unconditionally, wanted to open my arms and welcome him back. But I wasn't the same woman who had driven 8 hours to Virginia 2 years ago, desperate for her son's approval and acceptance. That woman had died in a hotel business center when she learned the depth of his betrayal. Michael, I said gently, what exactly do you think coming home means? I thought, I could move back in here for a while just until I get back on my feet. I could help around the house and we could spend time together like we used to. I could tell you about everything that happened, and you could help me figure out what to do next. I felt something that might have been pity. He was 31 years old, but in this moment, he sounded like a teenager who had gotten in over his head and wanted his mother to rescue him from the consequences of his actions. And then what? I asked. When you get back on your feet, when you meet someone new, when the next opportunity comes along that requires you to distance yourself from your embarrassing background, what happens then? That won't happen again, he said quickly. I promise. I know better now. Do you? I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Michael, do you know what I've been doing for the past 2 years? He shook his head, looking confused by the change of subject. I've been living, I said simply. For the first time in my adult life, I've been making decisions based on what I want instead of what other people need from me. I've traveled to places I always wanted to see. I've taken classes in things that interest me. I've made friends who value me for who I am right now, not for what I can do for them. I gestured around the room. This house has become my sanctuary instead of just the place where I sleep between jobs. I wake up in the morning excited about my day instead of exhausted before it even begins. I've discovered that I'm actually quite good at pottery, and I've been thinking about selling some pieces at the local art fair. Michael looked uncomfortable, as if this recitation of my independence was somehow threatening to him. That's great, Mom, really. But don't you think it would be even better if we could share that? If we could be a real family again? We were never a real family, Michael. We were a mother and son who cared about each other. But even before Skylar came along, you were already pulling away. You were already embarrassed by where you came from, already looking for something better than what I could provide. His face crumpled. That's not true. I love you. I believe you do, in your way. But love isn't enough if it comes with conditions. If it disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient or socially awkward. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had planted last spring. You chose Skylar's version of family over me because it offered you something you wanted more than my unconditional love, and that's your right. But it's also my right to choose not to be available as a backup plan when your first choice doesn't work out. So that's it? His voice rose with panic and anger. You're just going to throw away 31 years because I made one mistake? I turned back to face him, and I could see he was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't going to go the way he had imagined. Michael, you didn't make one mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions over many months. You chose to lie to me about the wedding plans. You chose to tell people I was too troubled to attend. You chose to let your wife humiliate me publicly and then blame me for the scene she created. And you chose to prioritize your social climbing over our relationship. I moved toward the front door, a clear signal that this conversation was ending. Most importantly, you chose to let me believe for 2 years that I was the problem, that I was somehow inadequate as a mother, that my love wasn't worth preserving. Do you have any idea how much therapy it took for me to stop believing that? He followed me to the door, his composure finally cracking completely. Please, Mom. I don't have anywhere else to go. I've lost everything. No, I said firmly, opening the door and stepping aside. You didn't lose everything. You traded it. You traded your integrity, your family, your authentic self for the promise of a life that was never really yours to begin with. The fact that the trade didn't work out the way you hoped doesn't mean you get to take back what you gave away. He stood in my doorway, tears streaming down his face, looking lost and desperate. For a moment I wavered. This was my child, the baby I had nursed through countless illnesses, the boy I had cheered for at every school play and baseball game, the young man I had been so proud to see graduate from college, but he was also the man who had looked me in the eye at his wedding reception and denied knowing me. I hope you find what you're looking for, Michael, I said quietly. I hope you learn to value the people who love you before you lose them. But I can't be your mother anymore. I spent too many years of my life trying to earn a place in your world, and I won't spend whatever years I have left waiting for you to decide I'm worth keeping around. I started to close the door, but his voice stopped me. What am I supposed to do? I looked at him one last time, this man who had once been the center of my universe, and felt nothing but a profound sense of completion. The same thing I did when you abandoned me, I said. Figure it out. I closed the door gently but firmly and walked back to my pottery wheel. I had a vase to finish, dinner plans with my friend Eleanor, and a new life to continue building. Outside, I heard his car start and drive away. I didn't go to the window to watch him leave. I had already said goodbye to Michael 2 years ago in a Virginia hotel room. Today, I had simply made it official. The silence that followed wasn't empty or painful. It was full of possibility, rich with the promise of days and months and years that would be entirely my own. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, and it was enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.